Hello. Last time I talked about alien life, I discussed the Drake equation and ideas on how to estimate the probability of extraterrestrial intelligences. One fact that loomed over this idea is the rather obvious one that we haven't found any clear evidence of alien species. We've found a few interesting signals, such as say the wow signal, and we have some ideas and a few people think they've seen aliens, but nothing insanely obvious. Nothing that would convince the majority of scientists. This then leads to a problem, and it was pointed out an incredibly long time ago by Enrico Fermi, who said that even with a conservative estimate of the speed of space colonisation, species of aliens could traverse the Milky Way on a timescale of order millions of years. If some alien species could have formed on other planets in the galaxy, and if they have, why haven't we spotted them? Why haven't their probes or their signals reached us? To give you a more mathematical idea, the Milky Way is just over 100,000 light years across, or roughly 10 to the 17 kilometres. So, deliberately sent messages or light signals towards us should reach us within about 100,000 years, probably less depending on where in the galaxy they came from. And travel or colonisation of the galaxy would be plausible. Some of humanity's probes have already reached over 200,000 kilometres an hour, and we're really on the first steps. We only invented flight around a century ago, so a more advanced civilization could cover that distance fairly fast. This then sets up the fairly simple conundrum. Why can't we find these aliens? What I'm going to do is split our answers into three rough categories. One is that aliens for some reason can't contact us. The other is they can but won't, and the last is that we can't detect them. First up, the aliens can't contact us. Interestingly, Fermi coined his paradox before Drake worked through the Drake equation, but he was using a similar methodology of splitting the problem of whether intelligent life arose into the possibility of hosting Earth-like planets, which he thought was fairly likely, and getting a large fraction where intelligent life evolved. So a quick recap of the Drake equation. Frank Drake wrote an equation to give an idea of what you need to consider to work out how likely communicating alien species are of arising in the galaxy. The Drake equation mathematically is the rate of star formation multiplied by the fraction of stars which form planets multiplied by the average number of habitable planets which form around those stars, which gives us a rate that habitable planets form. We then multiply this by a series of terms which relate to what an alien species must overcome to be able to send communications into space. This would be what fraction of the planets develop life, multiplied by the fraction of those which develop intelligent life, multiplied by the fraction of those civilizations which develop technology to send signals into space. Multiply that by the length of time these alien species send signals for. You can get then an estimate for the number of communicating alien species in our galaxy at any one time. So we can try and use some terms in this equation to work out where the stopping point is. So a good example is life could be an incredibly rare event. For a large number of possibly habitable planets, the probability that any of them develop life could be incredibly tiny. As you can guess, if you put an incredibly small number in this term for the fraction of habitable planets that develop life, you could get a Drake equation estimate of far less than 1. And if the estimate for the number of intelligent species in our galaxy is incredibly small, of the order 1 or 2, then suddenly the Fermi Paradox doesn't seem so unreasonable. So what other terms in this equation could be small? Another one is that life could develop, but the probability of life developing advanced intelligence is very rare. A proponent of this idea could point out that on Earth, there's an enormous number of species, but humanity seems to be the only one that's developed the ability to travel in space, Hitchhiker's Guide notwithstanding. It could also be that only a small amount of these intelligent species are able to communicate through space. Consider the time gap between early hominids with the intelligence we're looking at and developing space travel. This might not be a complete explanation for the lack of communicating species, But it could work as if the number is already small of species developed, this could push us over the brink. Also, a species that's not communicating is unlikely to be traversing the galaxy. So, again, this sort of thing, turning intelligence into the practical skills needed to colonize a galaxy, could be a stopping point. But what if there are alien civilizations turning up with both intelligence and the technology to travel the galaxy, in our galaxy at the moment? What explanations could we find then for them not to be visible? Some options include intelligent life being incredibly likely to destroy itself. Technologically advanced civilizations would likely be able to develop the technology to at least send it back to the Stone Age, as it were. Nuclear weapons, destroying the planet's climate, developing a super disease that wipes out enormous chunks of the population. There are plenty of ways for an intelligent species to knock itself back before it tries to colonise the galaxy, or in the early stages of colonisation when it's still relying on one stellar system. It's also just bad luck. The species could get knocked out by other things. Consider dinosaurs dying due to asteroid strike, or again, a completely natural disease wiping out most of the population. Another option is that intelligent species actively decide not to explore very far into space. They build tall rather than expanding outwards, and perhaps develop technology like mind uploading or similar, or incredibly efficient use of resources, and live in a very small area of space but very well, rather than trying to expand outwards. Remember, expanding outwards into space, even if you're more technologically advanced, is going to require a lot of resources, especially if you're sending enough to start up a colonisation attempt. But there is another category that I mentioned. What if we're failing to detect alien life? I mean, an alien species that's gone quite far in colonising the galaxy may have sufficient technology to keep itself hidden from us if it wants to. Or we could just be not searching for the right things. Humans use radio heavily for communications because of how well it travels through the Earth's atmosphere. Would aliens on different planets use this? Would they encode their data in a similar way? This would really put a hole in our radio-heavy attempts to detect life. However, it would still need to be paired by why we haven't met aliens in other ways to be a good explanation. But of course, as I said, we could just be incompetent at detecting them. Or just detecting is very difficult, even if an alien civilization is colonising around the galaxy. If they left a sort of buffer zone between them and us, we're very unlikely to have spotted any sign of them. I mean, we can't detect alien sort of spaceships or things like that from a long way away. We can barely detect extrasolar planets very recently, and we can't even really detect extrasolar moons. So what are the odds of detecting alien space fleets? And our search for things like biogenic gases or other signs of life on other stellar systems is, again, still in its infancy. But that still doesn't explain why aliens haven't came down and seen us. I mean, obviously there's surely people who claim that they have, but there hasn't been something radically obvious. Another point could be that aliens just tend to hide. They would be aware of the possibility of life far more intelligent than themselves, and could be trying very hard not to be spotted, which really messes with our detection. They could observe Earth scientifically from afar, and try to avoid interfering with humanity, either because it would cause problems for their scientific observations, or because they don't want to give themselves away by interacting with an obviously not very technologically advanced planet. Or perhaps they have visited, but for some reason don't want to make it common knowledge. My favourite daft idea about this is that alien encounters are done by basically the equivalent of alien teenagers having a laugh. Let's pick this poor sod out of a field, right, take him up to the spaceship, show him around, and then bung him back down again drunk. No one will ever know. It'd be great fun. And if I were an alien teenager, I'm sure I'd give that a go. This is by no means all the possibilities. There's explanations far weirder, far more radical than this, but I think it gives you an idea of the sort of problem that we have here. and some of the attempts to solve it. I've been Mike. Goodbye.